Well, I have a story today that has a familiar character that we met on the first day of kindergarten together, our friend Chester. And Chester is the main character in the story I have today called A Kiss Goodbye. Now, remember how when we started our year, Chester was here to make us realize that at kindergarten, Mrs. Oberg loved and cared about you. And even if you were missing your family, you could squeeze that little heart close to yours and think about how much everybody at your family cares and loves you. But at school, it was okay because we were here together too. Well, now Chester has another lesson to teach us about. And today, Chester has something that he has to say goodbye to. Just like we are finishing our kindergarten year, and it can feel a little sad and a little like, oh, I don't know what to think about. What am I going to do next year? But just remember how when we came to kindergarten, we didn't know how to go to lunch. And then we figured it out. We didn't even know where the bathroom was. And then we figured it out. And even those things that seemed a little scary, we got it. So this story is about how Chester has to go on a new adventure, just like all of you will. A Kiss Goodbye by Audrey Penn. I'm going to have Chester come back at the end of the story to say goodbye to all of you again. And I know you're going to love this one. It's illustrated by Barbara Gibson. A Kiss Goodbye. Oh, and there's a little message here from the author. To all my friends, big and little, who find their way to the other end of the path. Just like all of you on a journey. Chester Raccoon sat in the corner of his tree hollow and frowned. I'm not moving, he announced stubbornly. I'm staying here. I want to stay with my tree and stay with my friends and stay where I've always lived. Mrs. Raccoon patted Chester's worry-furrowed forehead. I understand how you feel, she said, but I'm afraid we all have to move. I like it here, said Chester. It's my home. It's my home too, said Mrs. Raccoon, and Ronnie's. And I know how scary it is to move to a new place. But sometimes, like when you started school and changed classes, you have to do things that are scary and hard at first. I know. Maybe you could think of moving as an adventure. Chester scrunched up his face and grumbled. I don't like adventures. I had an adventure down at the pond and I fell in chasing a frog. Poor Chester. He is really thinking of everything that's making it even worse, isn't he? I had an adventure up a pine tree and I got prickly pine cones in my tail. I had an adventure in Red Rock Cave and I got smacked by a bat. Mrs. Raccoon laughed. Well, this will be a different kind of adventure. This time we'll all be together. You, me, and Ronnie. Chester didn't budge. He just sat there with his arms folded and a stubborn expression on his face. Why do we have to leave our tree anyways? He wanted to know. I like this tree. I'm used to it. We can all feel like that sometimes, can't we, kindergarten? The line has been drawn around our tree. Soon the tree cutters will come and they'll cut it down for wood. Chester poked his head out of the hollow and looked around. There's lots of other trees. Why can't they take those? Mom said, they're cutting down all the trees in this part of the woods. But I've picked out a new tree to live in that's big and comfortable and has lots of holes for us to look out. Chester sat back down and looked thoughtfully. What if I don't leave? What if I just sit here and I never leave this tree again as long as I live? Will they still cut it down? I'm afraid they would, said Mrs. Raccoon. But you know, moving isn't so bad. I've moved a lot of times. It's hard at first, but then you make new friends and you fix up your new tree just the way you like it. Besides, don't you think you'll get a little lonely if you just stay here by yourself? The deer are moving and the squirrels, and so are the skunks and the foxes. Don't you want to stay with your family? Will I have to go to a new school? Asked Chester. I suppose you will, but you never know who you might meet. Don't you want to make some new friends? I like the friends I have already. I don't need to make new ones. I see. Well, I would certainly miss you if you stayed here, said Mrs. Raccoon. Aren't you afraid you might miss us? I'd miss you, admitted Chester. I'm not so sure about Ronnie, though. Mrs. Raccoon chuckled. I think you'd miss Ronnie most of all. Who would be there to pull your tail or tickle your mask or follow you everywhere you went? Remember, Ronnie's his little sibling, so sometimes they can bother you, but you would miss them. Chester sat back and took a good long look around the inside of his hollow. He memorized its round shape with its lookout hole just below the thick branches that house the bird nests and squirrels. Then he closed his eyes, pressed his palms to the wall, and felt the texture of the wood and the bark. Can you just kind of reach out and feel how he would be touching the tree to feel that bark in his little paw? When he opened his eyes, he reached up and broke off a small piece of bark from the wall and pushed it deep into his pocket. He put his face up close to the wall and breathed in the sweet scent of the white oak. Next, he gazed out the hollow. He wanted to always remember how it had looked, and the way the stars and the moon shone between the branches, and the way the afternoon sun hit the leaves, turning them a fiery red in the fall. When he ducked his head back into the tree, he placed a gentle kiss on the palm and pushed it up against the wall. And he's putting it right on the wall of his tree. Goodbye, he told the hollow. I'll miss you. When Chester climbed outside, he wrapped his little arms around the tree trunk and said goodbye again. This time, a tiny tear rolled down his cheek. There's this little tear. Mrs. Raccoon led Chester and Ronnie down the path, and the other animals had taken to the far end of the distant woods, where they would all soon be living. You know, Mrs. Raccoon told Chester, you don't ever have to forget your tree. You can keep it in your head and in your heart forever, just like it is today. So saying goodbye doesn't mean you have to forget about things, friends. It means you just keep it in your head and your heart. Keep those thoughts. Chester stayed quiet all the way to the far end of the woods. When he arrived at his new tree in the morning, he folded his arms and pouted. Mrs. Raccoon nuzzled him on the ear. Why don't we all go inside and see how we like it? Chester followed his mother and brother into the tree hollow and looked around. He reached into his pocket and fingered the small piece of bark that he had brought with him from his old home. It felt good just having that little piece with him. What do you think? Mrs. Raccoon asked. It's okay, said Chester. So he still has that little piece of his old home with him, just like you always have memories and thoughts of all the things we did in kindergarten that you can keep in your heart And you even have pictures and real things like that at your houses. Ronnie looked up at his big brother and saw that he was sad and climbed into his lap. Reaching up, he pulled Chester's whiskers and tickled him under his arm. Chester couldn't help but giggle. "I miss my tree," he told Ronnie. "I do too," came a sweet voice from outside. Chester's ears perked up, and he popped his head out the hollow. There, standing at the foot of the tree, was a young raccoon, just about his age. "Hi, I'm Cassie," said the young raccoon. "Who are you?" Fun. Chester ducked back into the hollow and brushed back and ruffled his black mask. When he popped his head back out, Cassie was still there. "I'm Chester," he said shyly. "Do you live here?" "I do now," said Cassie. Chester left Ronnie with his mother, climbed out of the tree, and stood beside the pretty raccoon, his tiny pink cheeks plumped with a big wide smile. So look at that, he's found a new friend already. Mrs. Raccoon peeked out the tree and grinned. Placing a kiss on her palm, she showed it to Chester and told him to go play. Chester kissed the center of his palm and turned it back towards his mother. "All right," he told her. "I'll stay." And there's Chester and his new friend, Cassie. So kindergarten, Chester was here when we came together, and Chester is here to say goodbye, have a great summer, come back and see Mrs. Oberg, and Chester will be here in kindergarten. And remember, always take a piece of things you care about with you in your heart. Bye, guys.